Welcome to the SAP HANA Academy. My name is Bob, and in this series of videos we'll be looking at SAP S4 HANA. In this video series we'll be looking at how to extend S4 HANA with external data. In this video we're going to look at loading some data used in this video series into Hive. Please note that this video set shows certain features in the SAP HANA database which may require specific licenses even if you are using S4 HANA. If you are using your own S4 HANA system and are not using the S4 HANA trial, please contact your account executive or partner manager to see if you are licensed to use these SAP HANA database features. They are SAP HANA Smart Data Access, SAP HANA Smart Data Integration, creating a virtual table in SAP HANA, and creating a calculation view in SAP HANA. So the assumption with this series of videos is that you have access to a Hive system running in Hadoop. So if you don't, you can follow along with the SAP HANA Academy's series of videos on installing Hadoop and Hive, and you should see a link appear on the screen or down below in the video description on where that playlist is. So if you don't have access to Hive within Hadoop and you can't provision a server in AWS or any other cloud provider, another option is, instead of connecting to an external data source which is Hadoop, what we're going to cover in part 4 of the series is connecting to an external data source but which is a CSV and which resides on your Windows remote desktop. However, it's a good idea for you to watch the complete series of videos to understand how we actually connect to external data systems within SAP S4 HANA. So in terms of using your S4 HANA 1511 partner image to access Hadoop that you've built, in my example I've built that Hadoop on an image in AWS. What you'll need to do is add 2 IP addresses to your security group in AWS. Just to recap, what you have in your partner image is 3 images. Essentially a HANA image, a Java image, both running on Linux, and lastly you have a Windows remote desktop. So the only IPs that you have to add, which you can get from the right hand side, are your external IPs for your HANA and your Windows remote desktop. Now if I go to my AWS console, you can see my Hadoop's running, and if I go to my security groups and edit my security groups, you can see here I've added the 2 external IP addresses again for the HANA machine on the partner image and also the Windows remote desktop. And for me, those external IPs start with 52. Additionally, on the partner image itself, here you can see I've installed Chrome and I'm accessing my Hadoop system on port 8080. I can see that all the various servers are up. I've also included Spark because I'm doing this for another installation for SAP HANA Vora, although you don't actually need Spark. And of course, additionally, how did I install this? Well, I installed PuTTY on the partner image. Now, if you're not sure how to use PuTTY and PuTTYgen, all you have to do is go to Google and do a search for SAP HANA Academy PuTTY, and a video will appear which is SAP HANA Academy Live 2 2A Linux connectivity to SAP HANA 1, but you can actually follow through that video and it'll go through an install of both PuTTYgen PuTTY, and it will also show you how to convert a PEM file to a PPK. Of course, this ultimately means that when I launch and log into my Hadoop system, I can then access the system as you can see here. So how do I get some test data to do with airports into my Hadoop system? Well, we're going to use Hive. So what I'll do is I'll run a clear and I'll do a sudo sudo, and then I'll log in as a specific user by doing a clear. So I'm going to log in as the Hive user. So I'm going to do an su-hive. Again, all of these commands are available within our GitHub repository. And what we need to do, if I do an ls, you can see that there's no files here. What we'll firstly need to do is get a small CSV, which is going to contain some data. Of course, eventually you're going to join that to data within S4 HANA. So here's a URL. Again, this URL will be available within our GitHub repository. And all we're doing is running a wget. We're connecting to our team's Dropbox. And we're taking a CSV file called Airport Web Services, and we're basically storing it as a file called airportwebservices.dat. So that's the first thing you'll need to do. So if I do an ls, we'll see that the file's there. So what is contained within the file? Well, all you need to do essentially is run a cat and then type Airport Web Services, and you'll see exactly what's in the file. So if I run it, you can see, just to show you the last line, essentially you have an airport code, the airport, you have an address, and then you have the lat long and a URL of that specific airport. So again, later on, we're going to do a very simple join based on this airport code from data in Hadoop to data which exists in S4HANA. So how do we get this into our Hadoop system or into Hive? Well, what we need to do firstly is run some commands. So I'll run a clear. So the first thing we need to do is, just to show you, is firstly we need to create a folder within our Hive system, and I'm going to create essentially a database called S4SHA for SAP HANA Academy, SAP HANA Academy. So HDFS space DFS make dir, which is a typical Linux command, and we're going to make it in this folder. Now, how can we see if it's there? Well, if I just do an up and go back to the make dir, it's just a normal Linux command within what's called the tool HDFS. If you Google HDFS DFS, there's lots of info on it available on Google. All I'm going to do is an ls to see does the folder exist. So if I do an ls, it should give us a response that there's actually nothing in the folder, which is correct. And if I do an ls of the warehouse folder, we should see that we've got that s4sha.db, which essentially is a database. So what we need to do now is create a table in Hive. So if I do an ls, we can see that we've got that airportwebservices.dat file. But what we need to do is create an empty table in Hive. Now, there are different ways to do this. This is just the way I'm doing it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to launch Hive by simply typing Hive, and then we should be prompted with Hive. Now, of course, the assumption here is that your Hive is running here and that you've got no errors or alerts. So the first thing you might want to look at is what existing databases do you have. So if you just type a show databases command, we get the default database which exists, but we want to actually create a database. So all I'm going to do is type create database, and then I'm going to call it S4SHA like so. So now when I create that database, all I need to do is, if I again run the same command as before, show databases, we can see now that we've created that database, and now I can type a use S4SHA, and that means we're in that database now. So of course, now that we've done that, we want to create the table. So this is the command to create the table. I'll just paste it in, and essentially we're creating a table if it doesn't exist in the S4SHA database called Airport Web Services. Of course, it'll contain those 7 columns, and the CSV file that we're using, or the DAT file, it's the fields are terminated by a comma. So now if I run a show tables, we should see that we've created that table, Airport Web Services. But if I do a select star from Airport Web Services, we should see that the table's actually empty, because there's no data loaded into that table. So how can we get data in? Well, if I exit out of Hive, we need to put that DAT file into HDFS. So the command that we use to do that is as follows. We're running a HDFS DFS. We're putting a dash put. We're taking that DAT file, which is at the root folder for Hive, and we're placing it in the s4sha.db folder in the Airport Web Services folder like so. Now, just like before, what we might want to do is check to see if the actual file remains. So if I run a similar command, but with a dash ls, we're just going to check that that folder exists. So if I just remove Airport Web Services and we go into the S4SHA.db, we should see that we've got that subfolder, which is Airport Web Services like so. Now, this last command really depends on how you've installed your Hadoop. So for me, all I need to do is make this folder accessible by a specific user. So depending again on what users you're using, on what users you've installed Hadoop with, for me, I use the default settings when I installed Hadoop. So I'm giving access to the Hive HDFS user of that folder, like so. So when we've done that, we can then relaunch Hive. And what we can do now is run a select on that same table to see if we've got data. And then I'll run a select star from that same table, but of course this time we should see that we've got data. And there we go. That's the data that we've loaded. Okay, now that we've done that and we've made sure that we've actually loaded some data into Hive, what we're going to do in the next video is look at installing the SAP components in order for us to connect our Hadoop to our actual S4 HANA system.